that's where propane really shines. Lower fuel costs, significant NOx and particulate matter reductions, no sacrifice in performance, and we have uptime. Whatever happens to the grid, we're grid independent. I represent 2,900 independent propane marketers across the United States, from the biggest as AmeriGas all the way down to a single tank. And so we have all that expertise behind it. He made that purchase just on his fuel savings alone because there weren't any grants. Because if you're clean, he said it straight to me. He's like, if I'm clean, how can I be any cleaner? But the fuel savings alone, we're purchasing these tractors. It makes sense to us on our CapEx and our OpEx that we want to bring in this equipment.
This is Greg Troutwine with Maritime Reporter TV, and we're very pleased to be joined by Jim Bunsey of the Propane Education Research Council, or as I like to call it, PERC, to take a deeper dive into a recent article he's written for the Marine News magazine entitled 8 Steps for Ports to Upgrade from Diesel to Propane. So, Jim, first and foremost, welcome back to Maritime Reporter TV.
Greg, I love being on Maritime Reporter TV. It's, from when we started several years ago, and just continually how propane is growing in this industry and maintaining its market share. And, that's why we wrote the article and, showing, because many people hear it on a daily basis. And I think last time you spoke to me too, I didn't know propane can do that. And, everybody just thinks about their forklifts and their propane, but, we're starting to get into bigger equipment and actually some vessels are starting to come out on propane. So exciting stuff that's happening. So happy to share the story. And we always have a good time talking with one another.
We always appreciate your insights and expertise on the use and expansion of propane as a fuel in maritime ports and logistics. And while I certainly don't want to steal the thunder from your article in Marine News, can we talk through a couple of the key points? Namely, to start, for anyone watching or reading that is mulling this fuel switch, as I'm sure there are many, what are some pivotal first steps they should take? Or, I guess more importantly, questions they should ask to evaluate the environmental and business case in switching from diesel.
So, biggest thing is you want to be clear on your goals. And I'm going to use my catchphrase today, but in today's tariff economy, there's a big change going on in the marine sector. Tariffs are going. We don't know if our imports, our exports, things are changing on a daily basis. So really, I always talk about you clean up the environment and ESG goals, but really the first thing is cost reduction. You know, the ports have to be more profitable. If they're not moving as many TUs, that becomes an issue. So they still have to maintain operations, still be profitable, which really puts propane, out front and helps us out. And then we have the DO report that just came out showing the grid instability. So, they're talking about, is the grid going to be 100 times more fragile by 2030? And when DOE says that that's an issue, so then we start looking at port operations, uptime expectations. How long can they actually be without power? We know when it's time to unload and move cargo, there's no extra time, so we need to get it done. Again, propane can actually help do that. Then we still look at, the ESG targets because you still have green and clean ports incentives that are out there that, operators sign that, hey, we're going to decarbonize and cut our emission goals by 2030, and they're still stacked with that. And when we're looking at, a lot of these grants are pulling away, DARA is going to be reworked. I'm kind of excited because the new DARA stuff's going to include propane. And not that it didn't before, but I think, it's going to be fuel choice. But all my competing fuels that are out there, propane really shines. So once you figure out what really matters to the port, where they need to get, they have their goals, we start looking at the inventory. And diesel displacement is key because we know particulate matter is an issue that comes around and it's one, we have our NOx emissions, we have the SOx, particulate matter, all those healthy that cause us not to have healthy working environments. It's a big deal. And that's where, as I spoke before, propane is there to help them do that. So we look at the fleets, we look at their age, we look at the duty cycles, we look at the fuel burn. These big port tractors that I've talked about many other times, they use a lot of energy. They're moving a lot of weight from one place to the other. They may not go fast, but they use a lot of energy. So we look at the tailpipe emissions. You compare diesel to propane, and the GTI studies show that we're 99% cleaner than diesel. So why not look at diesel displacement? Yeah, three manufacturers that produce propane terminal tractors. So, your choice is out there. There's others that are coming in that are starting to look at us and talking about propane. So the customers are actually asking for it because usually people come, "Hey, Perk, can you give us a couple $1 million to develop a new piece of equipment?" It's not happening in the marine sector. Customers are saying, "Hey, I have to decarbonize. I have to do it affordably. We would like this to run on propane." And so the OEMs are doing it. Really cool for me. So, we look at that, we see the available equipment. That's, where propane really shines, lower fuel costs, significant NOx and particulate matter reductions, no sacrifice in performance, and we have uptime. Whatever happens to the grid, we're grid independent because as much fuel as they need to store, if they need to be able to run 10 days, without being part of the grid, we have generators there and they can have that much propane storage on site and keep going and still be clean for the environment because we know propane does not pollute groundwater. It doesn't pollute the soil. It's one of those, if there would happen to be a leak, it doesn't contaminate anything. So big thing when we're storing it when we talk about, bulk storage, especially along rivers, lakes, and the ocean. So, the goals are there. So just the baseline. What do you need to do? And then, compare the total cost of ownership, and it's simple path. Propane is here to help them meet those goals.
So what specifically does PERC and its member organization offer for informational and planning resources when considering the switch?
So, big thing with PERC, and I'll bring this up because if people haven't heard of PERC before, I represent 2,900 independent propane marketers across the United States, from the biggest as AmeriGas all the way down to a single tank. And so we have all that expertise behind us. So you have PERC, the local propane suppliers, we're the planning partners. They're going to help you, evaluate your fleet, look at available technology, and then you're going to coordinate with those OEMs, and we can get demos, and then we can map the transition of the equipment from diesel to propane. So they're all hot to usually within a month or two, I can get a piece of demo equipment on site, and once people drive it, the sale happens because they're like, "Oh my gosh, this piece of equipment is so clean. It's quieter than the diesel. So simple to refuel." And just all those benefits. And we have large facilities such as WBCT and PNCT. I think they're up to 40 terminal tractors now. But the drivers want to drive the propane tractors. And that's what's super cool. And then you look at the savings. Working on a case study with Willie Wan because he has his 150 propane terminal tractors out there now. He talked about saving $1 million a year compared to running on diesel. So I mean, this is real money that's making a difference. So then we also would come in and we'll assist with the fueling options, because we're the propane experts. You may not, ports are used to using forklifts. They exchange their cylinders, but now we start looking at some bulk storage. What's this going to take? If we have 8 terminal tractors there, so there's going to put a 2,000 gallon tank, and the propane market will come in and fill it up every other day, and they can fuel on site and teach them how to fuel. We can train them how to be safe, and give them options. And then just remember the permitting. We're propane specialists. We're going to help you out. So permitting, compliance, fueling contracts can come in. We're stabilize the budget. So it's really, I would say PERC is the matchmaker, making end users with OEMs and fueling options that are there. So it's really easy for the transition. So if anybody's concerned, they can reach out to me. They can go to propane.com. We have so much information on propane.com that you can find anything you're looking for. It's almost hard because there's so much information there. But if you know you're going to go to ports, go for ports on the page, or material handling, and you can really see the available options. Or just reach out to me, jim.bunsey@propane.com, and I'm here to help them make that transition.
What should our audience be looking for and asking of the OEMs to ensure that their equipment is suitable to work in certain applications?
So, the big thing is, many ports and all of us, we're brand loyal, right? So you look and you can reach out. Many of the OEMs have available technology. So you're going to see if they have the application that can fit. Can it have the capacity? Does it have the towing capacity? Does it have the lifting capacity? Does it have enough fuel storage on board to get through a shift length? Is it an 8-hour shift or is it a 16-hour shift? Or is it 24 hours? How long does that refueling time take? And that's something the OEMs can talk to, or I can actually help assist with that. Next thing you really want to talk to them is about, EPA carb certs. You want to know the status. Are we there? Do we meet the low NOx requirements? Kind of, there's a big change out in California where, it's not going to be 100% electrification. but we're still going to have to be clean out there. We're going to have to meet the air district's requirements. So does the engine in that equipment, or does that equipment meet those goals? Then you really want to check out and see, the dealer network. How do they handle their warranty? How do they handle their parts? What type of training do they have available for your mechanics and techs so they can service and keep that equipment up and running? Because I always tell you, everybody, if it's mechanical, it's when it's going to break, not if it's going to break. We know things break. How is it serviced? So what kind of support do we give? Then you want to reach out. What are their fueling requirements? Are they going to be cylinder exchange? Because some of the even larger forklifts up to 40,000 pounds, they still do cylinder exchange, which a lot of ports like that. You have your bottles, you change the shift, you're talking seconds to change it. Well, even a minute by the time we disconnect and put it on. But then bulk transfer. Are we able to fuel at the fuel rates, 10 to 12 gallons a minute? So, it's comparable to our diesel. And then just reach out. What's the maintenance requirements of the equipment? And is it easily maintained? Because if our mechanics don't buy in it, or it's difficult for them to work, so it's timely to work on the equipment, we want something that's easy to maintain to keep operations going up. So really just form the relationship with your OEM. Ask the questions, and then if there's a piece of equipment, I know, I don't like to drop names too much, but like Taylor Equipment's working on their propane empty container handler. It's going to be a 55,000 pound forklift that's running on propane. So really cool stuff that's coming up. But most of these OEMs do have engines available that they can put in their equipment to transition to propane. It's really the same chassis, just with a different part inside of it, or a different engine.
Can you point out or can you discuss what are the nuances or challenges with propane? And can you discuss, I guess, the learning curve for the adoption of the fuel?
So really, when you talk about the learning curve, it's pretty straightforward. It performs and fuels similar to diesel. We're under moderate pressures. I think one of our last talks, we went way deep on pressures, but when you really look at propane, if it's 100 degrees outside, you have 200 psi. You start looking at other fuels, it's a lot more. CNG is 3,500 psi. Hydrogen is going to be 10,000 psi. And so relatively low working pressures. But it is a pressurized system, so contamination along the ports is better because we have a positive connection. So there isn't a leak point or a place for spills. And that's why when you look at refueling places for propane, it's so clean. You kind of look where diesel is, you get a couple drips here and there. And not that it's bad, but it kind of doesn't look the best, right? We're trying to clean up our environment and make things look better. So straightforward. And then also, these terminal operations, they do have Chloris 4 and 5 propane forklifts. So it's not a new fuel. It's just being used in a new way at the ports. So, and then you want to just really focus the training on the safe handling, refueling procedures. They're going to do some leak checking, routine inspections, and the main thing is emergency response. Anytime we're transferring energy from one place, there has to be an emergency procedure because if something happens, how do we handle the response? So most of the OEMs, they provide starter training, but you can go to propane.com. You go to our learning center. As a fleet manager, you can sign up. We have new modularized training that are 15-minute sessions and properties and characteristics of propane, safe handling of propane, but it's modularized. So as a fleet manager, you can assign the training to the employees that they need to take it. And they could take it on their phone, they can take it on a tablet or at their computer, and it's really on their basis and their time. So it's not taking 2 days to go take propane training. You can get what you need to know. And, I am from Perk, but propane.com has a lot of good stuff there. And it will record because if you look at NFPA 58 in the propane market, because that's the rules that we go by, they must be trained for the task that they're doing. Same thing with OSHA. But with using the Learning Center, that stuff is all documented for you. So if something would happen, hey, we trained, here's the procedures that we use. We use the perk material. That gives you some support and some of the standby, and you're training the right way.
Can you discuss specifically or generally, because I know we can't always name names, an organization that has made the switch? And if you can, discuss in as much detail as possible the CapEx and the OpEx aspects of making the switch.
So we'll keep high level, and then I'll drop some names at the end here. But us just talk capex and opex. It's a big thing that's being pushed right now. And so making the switch, everybody wants to save money. That's how we start out this conversation. Propane has an ROI to save money with all the environment benefits, right? So we're saving on maintenance, we're saving on the fuel cost alone. So really on the capex, it's there. When you look at the price of the equipment, similar price to gasoline or diesel, so they're not spending more for that piece of equipment. I'll talk to you about electric equipment all day long because you're talking 3x and 4x to go there. And as a lot of these grants are going away, There's going to be a place for electric. Electric equipment's awesome. I mean, the power and the torque that's available there. There's going to be situations where that still is, and hopefully that equipment starts to become more in line with gasoline and diesel. But 4X is really hard on a return on investment. Again, we're in our tariff economy right now. Everybody's kind of pinching their pennies and tying in. So, CapEx side of things, propane's looking really good. So you look at the need of replacement. We talked about the equipment that's there in the beginning, but older equipment's starting to phase out. So as they're phasing out, and when we switch to propane, a lot of times the propane, you work with the marketers or you look at the grants that are coming in, but your price of your infrastructure is much more affordable than other alternative fuels, or the marketers will tie in that infrastructure in your price per gallon. So you sign a fueling contract for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, whatever works out, but you don't have the upfront cost. So CapEx goes away when changing to it. So equipment costs the same. Infrastructure's one of the most affordable infrastructure to put in, one of the easiest to put in. You could be up and running in, weeks when your equipment comes in. It's not a year-long process of bringing in new power service in. So, our refueling's there, but as we start looking at OpEx, our operation expenditures, they're going to be lower. It's the fuel spend that's there. When you're saving 20 to 40% on your fuel cost alone, you like that. If you take a marketer and you get a fuel contract, you tie in for 2 or 3 years, you lock in your fuel pricing. Those are great numbers because you don't have any surprises in the year. So on the OpEx side of things, it really saves us. And so, it's easy to do. It's months, not years. You can implement it today. It's scalable. You can start with one piece of equipment and you can go up to 150 like Willie Vaughn does out at WBCT. Those guys have been using propane for 18 years. He just got another order of 23 units. He actually has Tyco coming in there. So now we have another OEM with a large delivery. Everything's working good for that. He made that purchase just on his fuel savings alone because there weren't any grants. Because if you're clean, he said it straight to me. He's like, if I'm clean, how can I be any cleaner? But the fuel savings alone, we're purchasing these tractors. It makes sense to us on our CapEx and our OpEx that we want to bring in this equipment. So, and I'm watching other ports. We're starting to get down to the south and the Gulf. They're shipping equipment. Capacity's coming to the table. They're shipping a lot of equipment right now. Moppy's shipping equipment. So it's happening. And there's ones, and there's, like I said, or WBCT or PNCT, they're up to 40 now. They did their first 20, they got their second 20, and now they're talking about 15 more next year. So their whole fleet's going to switch to propane. Again, the environment benefit are awesome, but alternative fuel, if you don't have an ROI, you're not going to switch to it. And you're watching this happen right now.